Hi, I'm Michelle Metzner, and today we're going to talk about the concept of retrieval practice, including what it is and how to use it for studying effectively. The learning objectives for this presentation are listed below. After this presentation, students will be able to define the concept of retrieval practice in a group discussion activity, explain the rationale for engaging in retrieval practice in a group discussion activity, explain the benefits of retrieval practice in a group discussion activity, explain how they may have used retrieval practice in a group discussion activity, and create a plan for using retrieval practice to study in a group discussion activity. This section of the presentation introduces the problem that the presentation addresses. So, what is the problem with how we're studying? Why are we here listening to this presentation? Well, we're here because, as German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered way back in 1885, when we don't employ effective memory techniques, we forget approximately 70% of information we hear or read very quickly. And even when students do their best and study hard, they still aren't able to recall the amount of information that they could recall if they were to use better study techniques. And why? Research has found that students use ineffective study techniques that don't embed learning in their long-term memories. For instance, when students cram for a quiz or exam, the information only gets held in their short-term memories until the quiz or exam is over. The information doesn't stay in their memories for long after the test. The fact that the information doesn't get embedded into their long-term memories explains why students often have to re-cram for and possibly perform poorly on cumulative exams at the end of the term or year. So if students aren't doing as well as they could be doing on their finals, then what's holding them back from adopting more effective study techniques? Students' resistance to changing their ineffective study techniques seems to be partly out of habit. Well, I've always just highlighted the book. And partly because they've been taught to study using antiquated techniques. Additionally, students don't often think beyond the grade they've earned on their most recent exam. If they did well on the exam they just took, then they must have been studying effectively, right? Well, not necessarily. There are several techniques for more effective studying, such as interleaved practice, spaced practice, and retrieval practice, which is the technique on which this presentation will focus. Join me in the next section and I'll tell you all about it. Now that you understand the issue, let's discuss the benefits of retrieval practice and look at empirical support for the technique, as well as a brief review of student reactions to the practice. One effective study technique that students can employ is retrieval practice. I can hear you saying, okay, that's swell, but what is it? I'm glad you asked. Retrieval practice is, very simply, pulling information from your memory without assistance from outside sources like notes, books, or the internet. You might be saying right now, I'm good. I spent all that time reading and highlighting the book, so I can go back and reread what I highlighted before the test. That you highlighted your book is not surprising because the most used study habit is highlighting text and rereading it before an exam. Unfortunately, researchers Arnold and McDermott argue that highlighting and rereading are time-consuming and ineffective study techniques, and students who use them end up overestimating how well they know the material. Rereading your notes isn't an effective long-term learning strategy because it parks information in your short-term memory. After you take the test, that info is gone from your recall. That's why you have to study so hard at the end of the term to relearn all of the material from the start of the term to prepare for your cumulative exams. You might be thinking, so if rereading my highlighted notes isn't working for me, what can I do? Try one of the many retrieval practice techniques. May I suggest self-quizzing? Research has shown that consistent self-quizzing after reading improves students' long-term retention of material, so it stays in the memory long after the exam. Having all of that information stored in your long-term memory would be really beneficial when you hit those end-of-the-year exams, wouldn't it? You may be thinking, that's all well and good, but what's the bottom line? What's in it for me? Results. Research has shown that retrieval practice embeds learning in the memory far better than rereading text and notes, making it easier to recall information after long periods of time. This means that you'll have far less hardcore studying to do at final exam time because you will have been periodically using your retrieval practice technique throughout the term. When your classmates are up until all hours and showing up to the test bleary-eyed and dazed, you'll be refreshed and ready to ace that exam. Look at you go! Self-quizzing can also give you a better sense of the information you don't know, so you know on which information to focus your study efforts. In 2009, according to researchers Karpik, Butler, and Roediger III, 11% of college students used self-testing, and when they did, they used it to figure out what they didn't know, so they could focus on learning that material better for the exam. I can see you're skeptical, so let me hit you with some empirical support. A 1978 study found that cramming led to better scores on the test that students took right after studying, but students forgot 50% of that information just 2 days later. The students who studied using retrieval practice, however, forgot only 13% of the information 2 days later, which means that they retained 37% more information than the crammers did. Why, yes, I do have more recent studies to cite. Thank you for asking. In a 2005 study by Roediger, Agarwal, McDaniel, and McDermott, middle schoolers tested a full letter grade better on information they had been regularly quizzed on before the test than they did on information that they had not been quizzed on. The researchers also found that when students reviewed statements of fact without being quizzed over them, the students remembered them only as well as material they had not reviewed at all. This once again supports the idea that rereading your highlighted notes isn't actually an effective study method. Also, in a 2007 extension of the 2005 study, researchers McDaniel, Agarwal, Hulzer, McDermott, and Roediger discovered that after 3 semesters, 8th grade science students averaged A's on material they had been quizzed on and C's on material that they hadn't been quizzed on. I know that it's one thing for researchers to be happy with results, so let me tell you what the students in the studies had to say about retrieval practice. Student reactions to the 2005 and 2007 studies were very positive, with 64% saying their test anxiety was reduced and 89% saying their learning was increased by the quizzing. Other studies found that students liked being tested frequently because it kept them up to speed on the material and they didn't need to cram for end-of-the-term exams. So see, retrieval practice is very effective, and though students may resist the idea at first, because who likes the sound of quizzes, am I right? They come to see the value of it, and they like the results it gets. So are you ready to learn about the types of retrieval practice you can apply to your own studies? Great, join me in the next section. Now that you know what retrieval practice is, what its benefits are, and how students feel about it, let's look at some suggestions for using retrieval practice, including reflection, flashcards, elaboration, and generation. There are many different types of retrieval practice. Some work better with certain types of subjects than others. The first type of retrieval practice is reflection, which requires learners to strengthen their learning by engaging in a multi-step cognitive routine. Learners first have to remember information without looking at notes or other prompts, and then connect that information to new experiences. Learners then have to imagine or plan how they would use that information differently the next time they encounter it. This type of activity works better in subject areas like writing, philosophy, or psychology because there are often no definite correct answers in these fields, but it can be used in any class. Another type of retrieval practice is flashcards. Flashcards are my favorite because I instantly know to spend more time studying the ones I missed. Flashcards are great for learning information that has definite right answers, like math equations, historical dates and locations, and definitions. One thing, pay special attention to learning the cards you don't know, but don't skip the cards you do know, or you might weaken your learning of them. A third type of retrieval practice is elaboration. Elaboration involves paraphrasing what you just read to explain its meaning or speculating about a character's thoughts or motives. Like with reflection, elaboration is usually associated with classes like English that require students to read passages and restate the main idea or theme in their own words, but it can be done in any class. The last type of retrieval practice we'll discuss is generation. Generation requires students to fill in information that is missing from a prompt. Generation can take the form of filling in full words or parts of words, writing a short response, or answering flashcards. Research has shown that tests that include generation activities seem to be better at bolstering student learning retention than multiple choice or true-false tests because those activities require students only to passively identify information, not actively fill it in. Now that you understand the issue, what retrieval practice is, its benefits, and student reactions to it, and gotten some suggestions for implementation, let's review. One major issue for students is that ineffective study habits park information in their short-term memories, which causes significant retrieval issues shortly after exams. If you've ever had to cram for a midterm in March and then re-cram for a final that covers the entire term in May, you may have been the victim of an ineffective study habit. I'm looking at you, highlighted textbook. One possible solution to ineffective study habits is retrieval practice. Research has shown that retrieval practice embeds learning in the memory far better than rereading text and notes, making it easier to recall information after long periods of time. There has been significant empirical support for the effectiveness of retrieval practice, ranging from studies in middle schools to those done in college-level classes. Students in the studies have also been supportive of retrieval practice, saying that they gained a better grasp on the material and reduced their test anxiety. Finally, we covered several ways in which you can engage in retrieval practice, including reflection, flashcards, elaboration, and generation. Thank you for your attention, and I'll catch up with you in the next presentation.